everyone, welcome to this episode of Strata Stories, where we share and own a Strata story and ask an industry professional what everyone could have done differently to improve that experience. So here we go. Today we're going to be talking through Jenny's Strata story. Jenny's story is about her frustration when a resident provides his party guests open access to their security building all night, and her disappointment in how Strata management addresses the issue. So, Jenny lives in Willow Vale Gardens, a well-kept security apartment building in a busy suburb on the outskirts of the city. Let me start by saying that I love where I live. I know for some, the hustle and bustle of a suburb like mine would be off-putting, but I love the energy. The minute you walk out of our building, you step onto one of the busiest streets in our suburb. Cafes, pubs, parks, little boutiques. People everywhere going about their day, including me. I absolutely love it here. Okay, so I think I can pretty much visualise the sort of suburb they're in. Although we are on the main street and there is a lot of foot traffic going by, the building is very secure. Every entry point is secured by a swipe card entry system. So I have always felt very safe in the building. Okay. A few weeks ago, I noticed that one of the new tenants that moved into the building must have been having a party. I could hear their music playing. It was only 6 p.m. and I could still hear my TV over the music, so I wasn't too bothered. At 8 p.m, I grabbed Molly's lead, Molly's my dog, and we headed out for our evening walk. When we got back, we noticed a group of people standing at the entrance door. A few of them seemed a bit drunk, but they all happily moved aside to let us in as I swiped my entry card and closed the door behind me. Okay, so no problems there. When the lift opened, a young man walked out and asked, "Can you hold the lift for a sec?" I thought, sure. And 5 seconds later, he and the group of people all piled into the lift with me. As the doors closed, a member of their group's phone chimed and they announced, "Mike just texted and said he's 2 minutes away." The tenant happily replied, "It's okay, I propped the door open. Just tell him we're on level 3, unit 32. I thought to myself, are you serious? I wanted to ask what sort of idiot props a security door open to a building on a main street. But I was also in a lift with a group of intoxicated people that I didn't know, and I thought it better to keep that to myself. Yeah, fair enough. They all piled out on level 3, and when the lift opened on level 6, instead of getting out, I hit the G button and headed back down to the ground floor. The doors opened to a man holding a case of beer. My guess this was Mike. I waved, said, "Hi Mike," caught the confused look on his face and stepped out of the lift giggling to myself. That's hilarious. I walked over to the building door and removed the rock that had been used to prop it open. Problem solved, right? You would think so. I headed back up to my unit and proceeded with my evening. I assumed the party ended at some stage, but I was sound asleep long before that happened. The next morning when I was heading out for our morning walk, I couldn't believe what I saw. The door had been re-propped open and was still open. It was 6:30 in the morning, so it had been open all night. I took a photo and emailed a complaint to Strata. "Hi." I explained, Unit 32 had a party last night and has propped the door open so their guests can enter without needing a security swipe. I removed the door prop last night at around 8:30 p.m, but they must have come down and re-propped it open after that because it's still propped open now, so it was open all night. Please see attached photo, Jenny. It took 4 days, but I eventually got a reply from Strata. "Hi Jenny, we have contacted the owner and asked them to ensure that their tenant understands that they are not allowed to prop open the security door. Thank you, Strata Management." I thought, really? That's it? I don't quite know what I expected to happen, but for a breach of security, it seems there should have been some sort of punishment. Not an email saying, "Please remember not to prop open the door, thanks, smiley face." I mean, what is the point of having a Strata manager? They don't do anything when something like this happens. Wow, okay. I'm really glad we actually got this story because I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I have actually been on both sides of this story. So I have been the resident who propped open the door so that my guests could come in. And I've also been the owner who has complained about someone propping the door open to let their guests in. Ironic, right? So I'm really excited to have this conversation and talk through this story with a Strata professional and see where my mind sits at the end of the conversation. So I've been thinking about who I want to talk this one through with. And I think I really want to talk this one through with Alex McCormick. Simply because, look, he has been a really big advocate for the Strata Stories initiative, but also because I feel like he'll tell me like it is, even if I fall on the wrong side of it. And I think that's a really important thing for this conversation. So let's see if I can get him to join the call. Here we go. Fingers crossed he answers.
Hello, Alex speaking.
Hi, Alex, it's Jody.
G'day, Jody.
Just letting you know we are currently recording a
hmm
episode about that story I shared with you last week. Have you got time to stay on and help us talk this one through?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love to.
Yay!
Let's do it.
Wonderful. All right, fantastic. Thank you. All right, so let's talk the story through. So I guess I want to start by saying overall, Jenny seems really happy with her building. So,
Mm.
at the beginning of the story, she makes all these comments, I love where I live and I absolutely love it here. And, she says, although it's on a main street, and there's a lot of foot traffic, the building's very secure. So, like, she really drives home how much she loves this building. So, I think she's pretty happy with her building overall. And I think when you first read this story, I think it's really easy to kind of make this about that she's unhappy someone was having a party, but I think the reality is throughout the story, she kind of makes it really clear she's actually okay with the party. Like,
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
yeah, like she kind of says, like, I could hear their music playing, but, it was still early and I could still hear my TV over it. So I wasn't really
And
fast.
I
Like,
think, she mentions that she likes the cafe culture of the area
yeah,
and sort of the social connectivity and the hub of activity. And, it didn't sound like at all that she's one of these people who wants to live in a house that just also
no.
happens to be in an apartment building.
Yeah, that's it.
So
She definitely didn't seem like at
she
8
and
p.m. she
she
expects everything to be silent.
she she if anything she appreciates, and she's made the choice to, the active happy choice to live in an apartment building, live in Strata,
That's
which
it.
is great.
Yeah, that's it. So I
Yeah.
think, her mindset around that I think is really good. And I think it's important to really note that I don't think this story is anything to do with being angry they were having a party. I don't think that's the case at all. So, and even the fact that people were coming into the building, you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, she makes the comment that, the people waiting outside the building were a little bit drunk and stuff, but, she makes a comment, they moved aside and let her in and she was happy to
Mm,
hold the lift for them. And so I don't think any of this story is about the her being upset about the party or being upset about guests being in the building. And I think it's really important to make that clear because a lot of stories around parties are very much about the annoyance of someone having a party. I don't believe that that's what this story is at all. I think she was completely fine with the party. She was completely fine with the guests being in the building.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
So
definitely a respect for it's everyone's. She has a respect for it's everyone's home, and I'm not going to begrudge
that's
anyone
it.
using it like a home, which is,
That's
again,
it.
that's great. That's how community living succeeds.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I think she only really gets angry once the resident announces that he propped the door open. So that's really the very first anger point that you see from her. So, she kind of, when he says it's okay, I propped the door open, that's when you see, you can see it getting cranky, like, are you serious? Like, what sort of idiot, props open a security door? So I think the question I probably would raise at this point, Alex, is she makes the comment about why she didn't say anything at that point, right? So she's in the lift with these people,
Mm.
and he made the comment right in front of her, right? And she was obviously, that was her annoyance point. That was the first point she got cranky, right? But she makes a comment that, she didn't say anything because she was in a lift with a group of intoxicated people that she didn't know, and she
Yeah.
thought it better to keep her thoughts to herself. Now, although I don't disagree with her decision there, and if I try to put myself in her shoes, I would probably behave exactly the same way. I would go, you know what, I'm just going to keep that one to myself because I don't know these people, right?
And and
But when I,
and some people, strangers, react in very unexpected ways when alcohol
that's
is
it,
involved. Yeah.
that's it. But I thought about it and I'm like, a lot of the articles online, Alex, they all say that neighbours should try and work things out
Mm.
between themselves, right? So I guess my question is, and I know this is very hypothetical because we don't know all the details, we don't know the personalities of the people in the lift and all those things. But when all the articles online say, hey, you should try and work it out as a neighbour, and before coming to your strata manager or whatever, try having a conversation with them, try letting them know that what they're doing is annoying you and all those things. Did she make the right decision by not saying anything at that point?
So I'm gonna stump for Jenny on this one and say yes. And
Okay.
I think it comes down to exactly what you've said is you've been in a situation and I've been in a situation out in the world. We've all been in situations where we've either been outnumbered
Yeah.
or we're feeling a little bit unsure about the circumstances of the people. Maybe they're all bigger than us.
Yeah.
Maybe you do know they're a little bit under the influence. Maybe there's other, any kind of characteristic that makes you feel just a bit intimidated out in the world. And maybe even it's as simple as she doesn't want to feel like a party pooper, you know. And she's thinking, okay, look, I'd really prefer it if they weren't leaving the door open, but internally it's going to be 5 minutes. I don't
Yeah.
want to be that person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in her mind, also I think later in the story she goes down and she says, hi Mike, gives him
Yeah.
a cheeky, self chuckle
Yeah.
and gets rid of the rock. In her mind, it's not going to be something she wakes up to as a problem
Yeah.
the next
That's it.
morning, and maybe she sort of has resolved it. And
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
because Mike's
Yeah.
arrived,
Yeah, that's it.
Mike's turned
Yeah.
up obviously,
Yeah.
and in
So
five
to
minutes it's going
her,
to be done.
that's
Yeah, yeah,
sorted. Yeah. So it's worth that couple of minutes out of her way to go and resolve what she believes resolve the situation rather than have a confrontation that could have a negative outcome.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
like if you were, maybe out in a suburban street with houses and there was a party and they had sort of spilled out into the nature strip and
Yeah.
maybe onto your driveway, and you just wandered out into your driveway and, ostensibly you're checking the roses or you've got the dog with you, maybe
Yeah.
trying to make it go to the toilet, you'd think, okay, they're going to notice I'm here and they're going to wander back into their
Yeah.
space. Kind
Yeah.
of similar to that. It's like a indirect but also semi-direct way of handling it. Just
Yeah.
letting yourself be felt, your presence be
Yeah.
felt a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
I'm kind of with Jenny on this one. She shouldn't have to tell a group of strangers, and other people would. Other people would not feel uncomfortable, which is okay
yeah,
too.
I was going to say, Alex. So I mean, me and you're obviously very aligned on this. Like,
Mm.
the risk was higher than the benefit for her to say something at
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
point. So we're both aligned that what she did is probably the best solution. But from a strata management perspective, is it ever likely that in a situation like that, like, the strata manager, if you complained about it later, the strata manager would come back and say, well, why didn't you say something? Like, it's, I just want to check, like, because obviously a
Yeah.
lot of owners might be thinking, but is the
So
strata manager going to go, oh, well, why didn't you just say something?
to me, probably not. I'd like to think
Okay.
most managers wouldn't. And the situations where a manager might ask, have you tried leaving a note on the car of the
Yeah.
person who's parking in your spot? Or
Hmm.
have you tried just having a quick chat with the person who's leaving a pram or a shopping trolley in
Hmm.
the hallway, and just letting them know that it really should be in the apartment? That sort of thing, the manager will ask, because often, as we see through our experience with many people in many buildings, that is going to resolve it.
Yeah.
I think this circumstance is pretty obvious, that it's a point of difference. It's
Yeah.
at night. There's alcohol involved, outnumbered, and she probably just wants to get home and get to sleep. You know.
Yeah. And look, when I think about it, like I've been, as I said, like I've been in the situation where she is, where I've opted, you know what, I'm not going to say anything.
Mm,
But as you said, I've been the owner in the past that, um, one of my neighbours in one of the other apartments have been doing a little bit of maintenance work or whatever, and they've had a drill going or whatever. And I know I'm working from home that day and I'm going to have a meeting in 20 minutes. I've been that person that's gone down and knocked on the door and said, hey, look, do you mind taking your lunch in about 20 minutes? Because I've got about a half an hour meeting and I really can't hear the
yeah,
meeting with all
yeah,
this noise going on. Like, and, I've had situations where, um, you know, someone's having a party in their apartment and it's gotten to like 11:30 at night and I'm ready to go to bed and I'm like, I'm just struggling to go to sleep with this level
mm,
of music. I've gone down, knocked on the door. Hey guys, can you just be turned down just a little bit? Like, just so I can try and get some sleep. And you know what? I've never had anyone tell me to, you know, F off or, I'm not doing that or who do you think you are? I've never had anyone actually push back on that. Everyone, I always run with the assumption that the person is not intentionally inconveniencing me. They're just not aware of my inconvenience. So
yeah.
they're not
I agree.
thinking about it. So I've had many situations where I've just had to knock on a door and say, hey, do you mind not doing this? Or can you stop doing that for a little bit or whatever? No problems at all. So I think there are definitely situations where, the whole question of, oh, have you just left a note on their car or have you, knocked on their door and asked them this or, have you spoke to them about, how this is impacting you? I think that's a very valid um, question, when someone's coming to raise a complaint or an issue with the strata manager. But I think in situations like this, there's also those exceptions of the rule where safety has to come first. And I think I think she made the right decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they
Yeah.
were doing this every Saturday,
Yeah.
at that point you have a chat. You
That's it.
probably you should go to the knock on level 2 or 3 and
Do you
say,
know
hey,
what?
would you mind just waiting by the door when your guests arrive
Yeah.
instead of propping it
Yeah.
open?
But it's not just
So
that,
yeah,
Alex. I've lived in a lot of apartment buildings. I've never known anyone to have a party all the time. Like, people only have one birthday a year. There's only one New Year's a
true.
year. There's only one Christmas a year. There's
Mm.
only one Australia Day every year. Like,
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, most people are having a party because they're celebrating an occasion. Those occasions usually don't happen every single week. So, yes, I know there'll be exceptions to that, and there'll be people who have loud music and friends over and stuff every Friday and Saturday night all the time. And there's the party house, or the party apartment, all those things. But most people, if they're having a party, it's a one off. And it's
yeah,
that whole,
and
if you're living in community living, be a little bit lenient. Like, if they're playing music at 9 o'clock at night, like, who
we've all done the
cares?
courteous thing and let somebody walk through the door before or after us. You
That's
get
it.
there.
Yeah.
You don't say, hey, can I see your credentials to make sure you live here before I swipe open the door? And we've all done the selfish thing where, potentially we've got a guest coming over and we buzz them into the car park so they can get to our space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
or we hold the lift,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Oh,
everyone
look.
knows you're not meant to do it, but we all do it at some point.
And the thing is, Alex, so again, both I've been on both sides of this,
Mm,
even in that way. So what you said, when we're letting someone in the door because we're going out and they're coming in, we don't ever stop and say, "Hey, where's your swipe? Prove that you're
mm,
allowed in here." Most of the times, okay, we had one of the buildings I was in. There was a bit of a security issue, and we got a note round saying you cannot let anyone, like, do not let anyone in the building through the door as you're going out. You close the door, that person can use their swipe to get in. So So they'd driven that home. So there was obviously something happening. I didn't know what it was because I was a resident at the time. I wasn't an owner, so I don't have the backstory on it. And I do remember that I was going out of the building one day, and it was probably 2 days after I got the notice. So I was very vigilant and still very, I'm going to do this.
Yep.
I was going out of the building, and there was a delivery driver with food, obviously, and usually I would have just held the door open and let them in, go up and deliver their food, whatever. But because of this notice, I was like, no. So I specifically started closing the door behind me, like stood there pulling it closed, right,
Hmm.
waiting for it to close. And of course, he's like, oh, can I just jump in? And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. Like, you'll need to buzz whoever you're delivering to. And he was actually really angry about it. He was like, are you serious?
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm sorry, but we're actually we're not allowed to. And they're like, oh,
That's a really interesting point you've just made, because one of the things I was going to mention after, sort of hearing the high level thing is I often find the people who own, and especially own and live in the building, owner occupiers, they will treat the whole building as their home and have maybe a hopeful expectation that other people see it the same way, which is why they're, I don't mind that they're having a party, because one day I'm going to be the
yeah,
person having a party, and I hope
have a
they would
party.
extend
That's
me the
right.
same courtesy. But if you
Yeah,
don't own in that environment, or you're perhaps, you're only going to be renting there for a year, or
yeah.
you're the delivery guy, or you're the Uber Eats girl or whatever,
That's it. You don't like. There's
to
less
you that's
care, I
not a
think.
home.
Like,
To you
yeah, that's
that's
it.
just in between you and your you and your uh, uh, your
Next steps.
outcome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah, like
Like,
that's all it is. It's just between you and your next step, and you don't
yeah,
really have any vested interest in
yeah.
whether
I
the
don't
other
have any skin in the
person
game at
feels
all.
like, yeah, skin in the
Like,
game, perfect expression, whether the other person feels like their home experience is what it should be.
yeah,
And I think it's long-term tenants, traditional tenancies, the longer they're there, the more they
yeah,
have an expectation. They're paying rent to
yeah,
be there. It becomes akin to that. But when you still don't have that skin in the game, it can be just assumed that you're treating the whole building like a home rather than your
yeah.
allocated portion,
That's
which
it.
is
Yeah,
the apartment.
yeah,
Yeah, so, and probably the other thing I'd say is when people have had a few drinks, it sounds like they had some pre-drinks, they're not thinking about security. Now,
no.
they may well experience it in their day-to-day lives. They may be in apartment buildings with the same thing. They may have to swipe in before they can get to the office lift or the right floor in their building.
Yeah, they're just worried about having a good time at that point.
But
Like,
at that
yeah,
point, after a couple of beers or glasses or whatever, that that rock's going to make my life easier.
yeah,
And
one hundred
so
percent.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess like you made the mention, like that her whole response, and she was still a bit, she still had a bit of humour about the whole situation when she went down and Mike
Mm.
opened the lifts open and Mike was there and she was like, "Hi, Mike," and she laughed as she stepped out because he was like, "How do you know what my name is?" Like, so even after that first point of frustration, she still had
Yeah,
a
she's
reasonable mindset. She still had a bit of humor about it. Oh, whatever. Like, she was initially angry, like, "Are you serious?" Like, and there's, "Oh, that's all right. I'll just solve the problem."
yeah,
Whatever. She
and
still had a
and
chuckle about
in her
Mike,
mind,
and
it's just Mike turning up, right?
that's it. That's
Or
it.
whoever's a few minutes behind Mike, and
Yeah. So again, like she seems totally fine about the party, about
mm,
everyone, guests being in the building, all that stuff. None of that seems to be the issue at all at any point through this story. And even to the point where she makes the comment that the party didn't even keep her awake, because she kind of says,
yeah, she's
it
not
ended,
bothered,
it must have
not
ended at
bothered
some point, but
by
she was sound asleep long before that happened.
not
Like, so
bothered
she
by the
didn't
party,
even,
not
yeah,
at all.
not at
Yeah,
all. And then, of course, like her anger point two really was
the next morning when she goes down and realizes the door had been re-propped open, and meaning it had been
Yeah.
propped open all night. And what that means is obviously, the guests had all left at some point. So, the guests had all left, the person hosting the party in unit 30, whatever it was, he's now gone to bed and the building's just open,
And
so,
it's on a main road.
and it's on a main road, so, she got angry that they propped it open. She then could still let it go, remove the door, the rock at the door, and just move on and not get too caught in it. And then again, the next morning, she's obviously extra angry because she realizes it's now been open all night. And but I think it's fair to point out that at this point, the resident doesn't actually know that he's made her angry. So we have to really
No.
remember here that she didn't say anything to the resident, right? So the resident doesn't know that he's upset someone in the building by propping the door open with a rock. Like he may be completely oblivious to the impact he's had to Jenny at this point,
Mm.
right? He doesn't know because he doesn't even know that she went down and closed the door. Maybe he thinks Mike closed the door. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I
Like,
think I think that's a really good point. And if this was a social event and you've hired out a space,
yeah,
or it was a networking event, or something in the workplace, maybe you're having a client evening or something, there would be a member of staff, or in this case, the resident, at
yeah,
that door, letting people, what I'm
mhm,
saying, letting the
yeah,
people in, bringing them in.
yeah,
And I think the difference here is fair enough, to Jenny's frustration and anger. The resident is clearly either told somebody, yeah, prop it open, right?
yeah,
Or hasn't given two hoots as to how people will
yeah,
get to the apartment.
yeah.
And to me, I sort of think, as a manager, but also just as from a common sense point of view, that's not really good enough.
Yeah.
You should be taking some responsibility in a shared space for how your people get from A to B.
Mm. But I think that's the
Um,
thing as well, Alex. So again, like as I said, I've been on both sides of this story.
yeah.
So I've been Jenny and I've been the resident, right? So I can really easily flick back and forth and
Mm.
put the different hats on. And I think what you have to remember with the resident and their experience at this point is that one, he doesn't know that he upset Jenny or that anyone's upset that the door's open, right? And two, he's not thinking about it from a security perspective because to him, he's only in his mind. I'm sure he's like, but I'm only letting in my guests, and he knows all of his guests, and he knows they're all good people, and they wouldn't
Eh.
damage the building, and you know what I mean, like, and no one has to worry about their safety around them, all those things. So from his perspective, he's probably not thinking about the experience he's giving to the other owners from a security perspective because for him,
Well,
he's just
yeah.
letting in
Any
his guests and he knows his
Yeah.
guests are okay people. Like, you know what I mean?
And
So sometimes
and
we assume that they don't care about the security, but sometimes they're just not thinking it through.
well, and that yeah, and I sort of go back to it's got no skin in the game in that
Yeah,
the common property isn't part of the home in a lot of ways. It's
that's
just
it.
getting from A to B, getting from the
That's
front
it.
entrance to the front door.
That's it.
And I think that's probably the difference. And where I said before needs to take some responsibilities, maybe the better word is there's a gap of awareness around just those differences between living out in traditional or more traditional detached housing,
Mhm.
or at least smaller strata where you don't have, everybody has a stairwell, set of stairs direct to their front door, or
That's
it's a
it.
townhouses or whatever,
That's it.
versus when you are in a building where people's homes are sharing that same exterior fabric.
That's right. That's
Um,
it. You know.
and it
Yeah.
probably is a gap.
Yeah.
Jenny made the comment, not to jump too far ahead, Jenny made the comment about the wording was punishment.
Yeah.
And I think without getting necessarily jumping ahead into that straight away, I think punishment is probably the wrong word.
But But it
And
is the word we all jump to, right? Like,
I'd center around consequences. You know, what's the consequence of just assuming your guests are getting from A to B without
that's it.
giving
That's
it
it.
giving it
Yeah,
30 seconds thought?
that's it. And even the
Um,
idea of forgetting, like, your guests, you know them, and to
mm,
you they're good people and stuff. But if they're all going up there and getting intoxicated, no one's their best self when they're intoxicated. You know what I mean? So yes, these are good people, and you know they're good people, but I think every group of friends has that one friend that when they're intoxicated, they're definitely not their best self and they probably display behaviors that are not their norm. Like, so even the mindset of, oh, but these are all good people. I know these people that are coming in, they're not going to do anything or damage anything. Or when people are drunk and intoxicated, dumb stuff happens. Like, so, even that mindset of, oh, well, nothing bad's going to happen because I know these people, even
yeah.
that's a little bit naive, again, not really thinking through the consequences and going, well, hang on, what could happen here? I've made this decision to prop the door open. What are some of the things that might happen that I'm not considering? And yes, I'm letting all these strangers, to all the other owners into the building.
Hmm.
That's fine because I know these people, I know they're good people. But if they're drunk, what could happen? Like, and I think that's maybe where that, as you said, like punishment is probably the wrong word, but you know, even the resident themselves hasn't considered what could happen. You know what I mean? They're
No,
just
no, they
they're
haven't.
just going, oh, this is what I'm defining should happen, and I'm not thinking anything outside of that. I'm not considering anything could go wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably it's a little bit indicative of where a lot of these conversations center around is a lack of awareness of what's what community living should look like
Hmm.
against our expectations.
That's
And Jenny's expectation is centered around, well, there's got to be a punishment. I want
it.
um, I want
That's it. I want my pound of
I
flesh.
want
You
my
know what I
pound of
mean? Like,
somebody call the police, get
someone's
the
head must
get the
roll for this.
Department
Like,
of Public Prosecutions on notice that they're going to be busy in about 3 months, and all of that, and if we can't do that, I want a fine, and I want
that's it.
them, I
Like,
want them on
that's
eggshells.
it. Like, I
Whereas,
want them to hurt for their
yeah,
sins. Like,
yeah, that's it. That's
it's very true. Like, and we laugh about it, but look, even in episode one with John, I've been very upfront. Like, I come from a long line of Karens, and like my instinct is very Karen-like in situations. Like, so I very much can resonate with the fact that people can just be so over the top. No, that's it. Someone needs to be punished because if I'm honest, that's what my brain automatically flashes to. Like, I am that person. I have to rein
and
myself back in. Like,
and I think what we said at the start, we've all done it. But as soon
but
as
it's
it
okay when we
happens
do it.
to us, yeah, it's soon. But we forget about it. We forget about it, right? It's like we're never the one to tell the inappropriate or terribly timed joke at Christmas. It's always, and as soon as
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
says, "Oh, remember what 2 years ago how you made that joke about such and such as leg injury," and you're like, "No, what are you talking about? I never said that. You're
Yeah, that's it.
crazy."
That's
And it's the
it.
same
Like,
thing here. When we're
yeah.
condemning the tenant who's letting all their friends in, we are, we're completely
We're
forgetting
forgetting about the time that we did
when the shoe
exactly
was
the
on
same
our
thing.
foot, whether it was exactly the same or whether it was close enough or maybe worse.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Every
Yeah.
every lift in the world, don't hold open the lift.
That's it. Like, yeah, but it's also that's the whole thing, isn't it? We're very good at looking at a scenario, at a situation through our lens,
Mm.
and I think that's really what the situation is here. Like, at the end of the day, the resident isn't intentionally trying to do wrong by Jenny and by the other residents in the building. You know, he's just looking at it through his lens. He's just going, well, I'm just letting my guests in for the party. Like, you know what I mean? He's just not looking outside his own lens.
And
And
I
I think
think,
that's, that's what happens in community living a lot. And I think that's where a lot of the disharmony comes from, because no one's intent. Okay, I can't say no one is intentionally doing things to upset other neighbours, because sometimes they are. You know,
Sometimes
human
they
nature
are.
is human
Sometimes
nature.
they are.
Yeah, but overall, I think it's fair to say, in general, your neighbour is not going out of their way to make your life harder. They're just not factoring your life into it at all.
One of the things I've become maybe even overly fond of saying in every medium you can think of and every circumstance you can think of is nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, how can I make strata harder for me and other people?
Well, I hope not. Anyway, like, I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of people waking up saying, "How can I make Strata easier for everybody?" But you're
Yes.
right. I don't think
Yes.
anyone. I
Which
don't believe
which
anyone's waking up
ironically
going, "How can I make it harder?"
probably often causes a chain reaction in the other direction. But I don't think anybody is waking up and saying, what's the most amount of annoyance that I can create, well intentioned, to make other people, cry internally
Yeah, that's
and
that's
about their
it.
apartment.
Yeah, that's it.
So,
Yeah, and I
maybe
think I think it's easy to assume malice, because it's easier to see that other person as a villain, because then we get to be the victim, right? Like that's the way it works, right?
it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely live in a Marvel superheroes dichotomy,
Definitely,
right?
definitely. So obviously, then, obviously, once she sees the doors open, obviously the next thing she does is obviously email a complaint to Strata. And
Mm.
she kind of goes through and she explains what's happened. It was propped open. She removed the prop, and they obviously put the prop back in, etc., etc. So to me, this seems like a reasonable action. Like, this is pretty much what I think most people would do at this point: take a photo, send a complaint to Strata. Right? I don't think there is anything unusual about this. I think this is what most owners would do. But I guess at this point, is there anything Jenny could have done differently? You know what I mean?
The
Like,
only thing I can think of is if she has access to that floor,
yeah,
she goes maybe at 10:30 when the night before is worn off slightly.
yeah,
She goes and knocks on the door and just lets them know.
yeah,
Um, I think that's probably whether she does do it or doesn't do it,
yeah,
either one is fine
yeah.
because again, for all you know, um, the tenant is an aggressive person who
That's it.
now has a hangover.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe two of his guests crashed on the couch. He's trying to figure
yeah.
out how to get rid of them. Is not in a good mood.
That's it. That's it. Yeah,
But that's all I can think.
yeah.
If she felt compelled to just
To
try
do it.
and
Yeah. But
resolve
other
it
than that,
outside
really,
of
I
it,
feel like
yeah,
she's done everything she could have done.
yeah, she got rid
Like,
of the rock.
yeah,
She yeah. So I think the
yeah,
email to the Strata manager is fine, and that
yeah,
she shouldn't be expected to do anything else.
yeah,
As a Strata manager, when you get that email, you're going to ask, hopefully, just so I know and have full context, not that there's an expectation,
yeah.
did you attempt any discussion before or
Yeah,
after?
like, has there been any interaction between you? Is there any
Yeah.
is there another layer that I now need to address in this
And
situation?
I just want to touch on that for a minute because the owner, when you're upset about something and you haven't done anything wrong, you very rightly feel that having the burden, or if you perceive the burden of action is being put onto you, not only do I want my pound of flesh, but now I'm unjustly the one who's going to have to go and get it. And
Yeah,
you know what? I'm going to start a Facebook group. I'm going to contact the ombudsman, and I'm back on you depending, and Jenny seems quite reasonable.
yeah,
But there are a lot of people who, if you ask them the question without without the caveat about context of this is just so I have all the information. If
yeah,
you just say, well, did you speak to them?
yeah,
That owner is going to be like, oh, so now it's a me problem. What am I paying? What am I paying you for? You do your job.
yeah, yeah,
How do I get on committee? I'm going to sack you. And I've heard that. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I've helped staff in the past have to deal with the fallout of that because they've said one thing and the owner has heard the other. And so if a
Yeah.
manager is asking that, they're not asking to put the burden on you. They're
They're
just
just
asking
wanting
for
to know if there's more information they need before they do anything.
yeah, because the
Like,
worst thing you can do is then take it to committee, maybe with a recommendation or an anecdote of a previous experience, and then you find out halfway through whatever process committee picks up that you didn't have all the information, and committee are like, look, we really appreciate you were on the ball, but it probably would have been better if the question had been asked, sort of thing.
yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah. No,
So
and I think that's a good point to make, actually.
just as
Like,
an owner, if you're getting that question back, it's not because the manager expects you to have handled
yeah.
it. It's an information gathering piece.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think that's a really really valid point because obviously in episode one, one of the lessons and outcomes that I raised from that episode discussion was um, for strata managers to really be mindful of having that we're in this together and not leave the
Mm-hmm.
owner feeling like they're on the outside having to deal with it all on their own. But I think what you've just raised is really important, a really important side of that for the owner to make sure that if the strata manager does come back and say, well, have you done this or have you done that? It's not because they're saying, well, you should have done that stuff. It's information gathering to make sure they fully understand your experience so they can then help you with that
100%.
yeah.
I'll give you a funny little anecdote, which I hope highlights where it's coming from. The current streaming binge of an old time adored TV show right now for me is House MD, the
Yeah.
Hugh Laurie show, which is fantastic, and particularly in those early seasons, just done the first two. Particularly in those early seasons, so many of the twists at the end are because there was a narrative gap, either in the medical history, the family history, or the chain of events.
I think they didn't know.
And when the manager is asking, have you had a conversation with them about it? Assume as an owner, and I know all the jokes about assumptions, but just take it as a given as an owner that in brackets is just so I know, just so I have all the family history. Like you're telling me you have a
Before I make a
yeah.
diagnosis, let's make sure I
It
have
sounds
all the
like you
medical
have
history.
it sounds like you have this hereditary disease. Can I ask, do you have a family history of this hereditary disease?
Yeah,
And that's really what it's about.
yeah,
So yeah, nothing,
yeah,
nothing, nothing to circle around too much. But if you're being asked, or
yeah,
if, and often the manager is going to ask quickly because they want to get onto it quickly.
yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
So I think then talking about obviously how the strata manager would come back and obviously needing to ask questions. I think one of the questions I need to ask at this point, Alex, is she makes a comment that it took 4 days, but she eventually got a reply from Strata.
Mm.
And I have to ask this question because I know every owner out there wants me to ask this question. Is 4 days a suitable turnaround time for this type of communication? Like, should she really have had to
So
wait 4 days?
let's let's add the caveat that it's not New Year's Eve
Yeah,
and it's not Christmas, it's not Boxing
yeah,
Day, that sort of thing.
yeah.
I would say no.
Okay.
The majority of management companies, without getting, I don't want to get too much into the
Yeah,
black and white, but they're going to have a service level agreement or a KPI or a communication commitment that says you're going to hear back within 48 or 72 hours, something
yeah,
like that. At least an acknowledgement from a human acknowledgement from your manager.
yeah, yeah,
If that email is not being read for 4 days, I'm concerned.
yeah.
Now, has the manager done all this action in the meantime and then tried to present something back to Jenny wrapped in a bow?
Yeah,
Maybe.
so that's what I was going to say. Like, from the Strata management side of this story, like what possibly got in the way of that quicker response time? Like, what is it we probably didn't see?
You know, Occam's razor, simplest explanation is usually it. Unfortunately, is probably that they're a bit overloaded and they haven't been able to manage the communication around that email in the timeline expectation. I would think it's unlikely that they read it on the fourth day, made the call to the tenant
Yeah.
then, and I don't think it was four days before somebody read the email. She said she's got a well-run building. It's highly unlikely that those two things, are adding up.
Yeah.
What's probably happened is the manager has seen it. First point of call is they've spoken to the committee.
Yeah.
How hard do you want to go with this?
Yeah.
There'll be a bylaw about it, and the committee may say, look, it's an honest mistake. Let's tell the owner, the landlord, and let's resolve this with a conversation before we end up with an aggro tenant.
Yeah.
Who maybe, sets the place on fire on their way out. And again, it's Strata Living's about people. Let's try and...
Yeah, that's it. Like...
they haven't damaged the property. We got lucky, but let's just say don't do it again.
Yeah, let's make sure they know they can't do that. Like, and if they're going to have another party, they've got to approach it differently.
And so the manager might have had 6, 10 emails or 2 phone calls on top with the committee or the chairperson. Might have been bylaws being quoted everywhere. It could have been a committee vote to issue a notice of breach. 5 votes to 2 against. A vote, and the vote was against issuing anything. The owner could have been involved at some point. But all he or she has gone back to Jenny with is, I had a chat to him, he's all good.
Yeah.
And it can be time consuming to bring somebody along that journey.
That's it.
But if somebody's emailing you about this or calling you about this or lodging the software ticket about it, it matters to them.
And I think this is the thing, right? And it's the little things that I think totally change an owner experience. And
100%.
that's definitely a big driver I've got here for Strata Stories Australia for this entire initiative is to really drive that understanding into the Strata service providers, that for an owner, it's the little things that make such a difference. Because here, what you've just explained, I didn't even think about the fact that they didn't just. This isn't just a reply. This is what we've done about it email, right? So, in theory, yes, of course, it might have taken 4 days because the person went off and did a bunch of stuff, and we have no visibility of that. So basically, it wasn't 4 days to reply. They may have had
the color-coded calendar reminder in Outlook.
That's it. So, and I think that's the thing. So, when I first read the story, right? So I've kind of read it. Well, it took 4 days for them to reply, but it didn't take 4 days for them to reply. What you've just explained to me then, and I wasn't thinking that way. I wasn't thinking about what happened on the other side of this email. It didn't take 4 days for them to reply. It took 4 days for them to address the issue and then let Jenny know what they did. You know what I mean? But from Jenny's perspective, all she's like is, it took 4 days for them to reply. That experience would have been very different if even 12 hours after she sent that email, she got a reply back from the Strata manager saying, "Hi, Jenny. Let me have a chat to the committee and the owner. I'll come back to you in a couple of days, and I'll let you know what's going to happen." Jenny wouldn't have been going, 4 days to get a reply. She would have been like, okay, so I got a reply within, 24 hours or 12 hours. And within 4 days, they'd come back to me and given me a resolution as to what they'd done. That entire experience would have been different because for 4 days, she was left seething.
Can I say what would have been better here? And it wouldn't have been best practice.
Yeah.
Maybe not. But it would have been better. And we do want to operate on the spectrum of good, better, best.
Yes.
Right? So this is a good outcome. There's better outcomes and then there's best practice.
Yeah.
It's good in that the email hasn't disappeared into the ether.
Yeah, she got a reply. I mean,
She
that's a
got a
win
reply,
sometimes.
and it's been addressed. And you'd like to think the tenant has some sense of awareness that if when I have the next party, I've got to not make this mistake. And like you
Mhm.
say, most people are good people.
Yeah.
If the OC manager or the Strata manager had just had AI, Copilot or whoever, would you like me to draft a reply? Yes. Had a look. I'll investigate and come back to you. Please allow a couple of days. Send. And then Jenny hears back again 3 days later. Day one, she gets that. Day four, she gets the where it's landed.
Hmm.
Maybe she's annoyed there's no punishment or consequence,
Yeah.
but she's not feeling like I was out on an island of being forgotten about.
If
Uh,
the whole, as an owner, I just want to feel like I'm not in it alone. We're in it together. That's all
and
I want.
and something I've heard. You've taken or I've taken over a building before, and one of the reasons um, there's been a need to change the building internally within the business is there's some conflict between committee and owner, and it's causing that management employee, a colleague, too much grief, and so it gets moved. Maybe it's a question of fit. And what you find out the question of fit was the owner who hasn't been heard. Where they've landed is they said, "Do I have to go on committee to get your attention?
Yeah.
Do I not count?" Right? And if it ever gets to that point, as a management business operator, it's got to be moved because they will go on committee, and then 12 to 24 months later, you won't be the management.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
And that's acknowledging the service gap as well. But at that point, if someone's saying, "Do I have to go on committee to matter? Do I have to be one of
Yeah.
the 5, 6, 7, 10 out of 50, 100, 300 who get on
Yeah.
committee for me to be worth your time?" If you ever get to that point, the game's over. The
Yeah.
relationship is
That's
sunk.
it.
And so Jenny obviously and fairly wants, or doesn't feel like she's being given the time of day.
Yeah, that's it.
And my view on the management's handling is you got a good resolution, but there were better ways to manage the communication. You know, there's no dropping the ball in terms of how did this happen, because the strata manager doesn't live at the building and they're not a 24/7 concierge service or anything like that. But how they
Mm.
handled it lacked communication, it lacked personal touch.
Mm.
Effective, okay, yeah, effective, but hasn't really left a good taste
And I think
in
I think
Jenny's
what you've
mouth.
just said there really kind of made me think. Like, so it's that whole, did Jenny feel like they cared? Did they like? And
No,
you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day,
just
for
no.
her to send that email because she was obviously upset about the fact the door was
Mm,
open, left open all night, right? This is obviously important to her, right?
mm.
Like, or else she wouldn't have bothered. Like, no one. I'm not going to take the time to complain about something I don't actually care about. Let's be honest. Like, we're all really
And
busy,
that's
right?
true in any walk of life when you think
Yeah.
about it. It could
So
be it could be, what's on the lunch menu at your kid's
that's it.
school. You might
That's
not love
it.
it, but is it enough for you to
That's it.
find a hill, wheel your 18th century
It's
cannon up there, draw your saber and get ready to die on it? Probably not.
That's it. So I think this is the thing that it would be really good for strata managers and building managers to really have that mindset, understanding that
Mm,
if an owner is emailing you about something to complain about something, it's obviously important to them.
yeah.
Important enough for them to have stopped, taken a photo, and drafted an email and sent it to you. Because if it's not important, I'm not going to bother. So if you
And
get a complaint,
and,
it
and I
matters to that
and I
person.
come back. Nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to make their life harder for
That's
themselves
it.
about their
That's
strata
it.
management or their strata experience.
That's it. And I think when when you think about it that way, right, and you think, well, hang on, it mattered to her, like, and it that because it mattered, and she didn't feel like she really got any sort of, yeah, we understand it is important to you. Let us help. Let's help resolve this. Rah rah rah. Like no one. It really felt. I can understand why she felt like the Strata management didn't care about the situation, didn't care about her experience, didn't care about her concerns. And I think, again, like, Strata is human. You know what I mean? We're dealing with humans living, humans making decisions. Like, the
Ab-
whole thing
and
is
it's
human, right? Like, and when you think about it, right? I'm just thinking back to the story now, right? When she chose to tell this story, the beginning of the story was she made a mention, and when I think about it, like, she specifically made a mention about the fact that although it's on a main street and there's a lot of foot traffic, it's a very safe, secure building. Now, you would only mention that if she cares that it's
she's
secure.
saying, I'm not a complainer, right?
Yeah,
I'm not the person that stands up at the AGM and feels the need to hold court for 15 minutes and that why doesn't everybody agree with me, sort of thing.
yeah,
That's not me. I love my building, or I love how I live, I should say.
yeah,
It's not about the building, but I love
yeah,
how I live. It's a good building. That's why I'm still living there. And, but this thing has happened that kind of really does matter. And it's not a dog that barked too early on Sunday morning or anything like that. It's something that made me feel not happy, not comfortable, not safe in my home. And the other thing I sometimes point to about Strata is it's just like any other property. It takes us so long, as an owner especially, it takes us so long to get that ownership in the property market.
yes,
That's a very hot topic issue and has been for about 2.5, 3 years now about the housing crisis.
hmm
But when we get there, we want it to be, that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
yeah,
I saved and I saved and I'm committed. I've got this mortgage and I won the auction or I made the choice and I bought in off the plan or whatever it is. We want it to be, even if maybe it's not intended as a forever home, we want it to be that personal home experience. Of course, it is our home. And when something disrupts us to the degree that we no longer feel that way,
yeah.
because for Jenny, very personally, I think you nailed it. It's a human experience. For Jenny, very personally, she's like, I'm not comfortable right here in my home.
And I think, because I'm thinking about this, so I've talked, I've talked to this, told people about this, a few people about this story.
Mm.
And when I think about it, some of the comments I got back from people when I was talking about this story was that the comments were kind of like, it's just a little issue. And she's probably being a bit over the top. And like some even hint, Karen territory, and we all hate that we might fall into Karen territory. But really, and I think this is where we forget that it's the little things that impact someone's strata
It's
experience. It
not
might
being
be
given the
small.
wrong order at the drive-through, right?
Yeah, because when you think about it, right, as I said, when you go back to the beginning of her story, she goes on, she explains the fact that, it's a very busy suburb and there's lots of foot traffic, but she makes a point, that it's such a secure building,
Mm.
etc. I think the reality is this story is about her safety, her sense of safety. And I think when you think about that, that's the only time the anger and frustration points in the whole story happen are the times where she feels her safety has been compromised, that sense of safety. And let's be honest, I think we need to be really definitive between that. Like, it's not that her safety was jeopardized, right? Because in theory, no one came in, nothing bad happened, but her sense of safety
Yeah, well,
was
let's
jeopardized.
look at it. There's a party happening. She's like, oh, cool, good for them. She takes the dog out for a walk. She comes across a group of people who are unintentionally blockading the entrance, but they happily do a Red Sea impression
Yes.
and make way. She's like, oh, okay, cool, no worries. And she's got her dog with her. She goes in the lift. She's waiting for the lift. A guy pops out and says, oh, do you mind holding it? She's like, yeah, of course. Okay, she's a good neighbor, right?
Yeah.
Um, if you were reading this short story in the paper, you'd think, oh yeah, not, yeah, of course, good person. And then she feels a bit uncomfortable, and that's a combination of the big group of people in the lift and the rock. She gets some ownership back. She gets her power back by, hi, Mike. Yes, I know it's
Yeah.
you. And she gets rid of the rock. She feels better.
Yeah.
She has a good night's sleep. And then she comes down in the morning and she realizes anyone could have entered the building and her safety, her personal well-being, they've all been compromised while she was so asleep she couldn't hear the party around the
That's
corner.
it. Yeah. And I
And
think,
that's terrifying. And
yeah,
that's not just terrifying because, Jenny's a woman and from the story living alone. That's
yeah,
terrifying because your home is a really safe place and you've had that sense of security and that assuredness of safety ripped out from under you when
that's
you had
it.
already done what you thought you needed to do to put it back.
And I think when you stop and think about it that way, that this isn't her being angry at someone's behavior or someone's actions.
Mm.
This is her being angry that her sense of security was taken away, her sense of safety was impacted,
Yep.
and then feeling like the strata manager didn't care. You know what I mean? And I think that's where that reaction from Jenny was at the level that it was when she got that reply from the strata manager. Because in theory, what the strata manager did and wasn't necessarily wrong, because one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about what was happening on the other side, and I didn't think about it, is the fact they'd obviously gone to the committee and all these things. There may not have actually even been a bylaw to say you can't prop doors open. And if there's no bylaw to say you can't prop the door open, then you can't actually,
Yeah.
there's no bylaw breach for it because
Yeah.
there's no bylaw. So there is a lot of things in the background of that would limit what the strata manager can do. Was there a bylaw to even have a bylaw breach for? Did the committee say no, we don't want to send any sort of breach for that? Like, we sometimes as owners go, well, the strata manager decided, and it's the strata. Most times, it's actually not the strata manager. The strata manager follows instructions and executes what they're asked to execute. So, but I think when you think about that, it's not the actions that Jenny was so upset about. It was that her sense of safety was affected, and she
And
felt like no one
she
cared.
wasn't heard. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like,
Um,
because when I think about it, right, and I know what some of the people who watch this episode will be thinking in their head. They'll be like, well, yeah, but just stay in your apartment. If you want to be safe, just stay in your apartment. Like, right? And I know because I've heard people make those comments before. But I think what people forget is that in strata living, in community living, a lot of the buildings, right? Yes, you've got your apartment, right? Behind your closed door and all of that, yes, you can control the safety there, etc., and that sense of safety. But common property, I've said this to people before, I think of the common property in my strata building like my backyard.
that's why I said the
Yes,
whole thing is your home. The whole thing
well,
is your
my whole
home.
thing is that I think of it like my backyard because my neighbors can see into it, but I don't have to worry about, but I don't feel like I have safety concerns when I'm in it, right? And that's how you feel in a
Mm,
backyard, right? So in your house is your 100% privacy spot, right? And,
yeah.
and place and all that. But in an actual freestanding house, I can walk into my backyard. I acknowledge my neighbours can probably see in my backyard, but I still feel a level of safety, and I don't feel like I need to have any safety concerns or awareness that I might feel when I walk out my front door. That's how I feel about the common property in my in my
That's a really
strata
good way to
building.
frame it too.
Like, it's not private, but it's not public either. It's still supposed to have a sense of safety in that common area. And I think people's response, "Oh, well, just go. If you want to be completely safe, just go in your apartment." That's not how it works. As an owner, you are paying a percentage of the upkeep of all that common property. You're supposed
Hmm,
to be able to go out and enjoy that as well, and you're supposed to still have that sense of safety in the common
yeah,
areas just as much
yeah.
as in your apartment.
So
Like,
sort of, if I was to, if we were going to do a little scorecard on I suppose the interaction with management, completely reasonable to contact the manager. Right? There's no obligation that you handle that yourself. Um, Punishment's a bit strong, but fair enough to want to know what the consequence was. Um, 4 days, much too long to expect a reply from somebody. Now, there should have been something in the intervening period there. And we can assume there wasn't, so sorry, Matthew was on leave with an urgent medical matter. But here's what's happened today now that we've read your email. There wasn't any of that. So under normal circumstances, I'd say, yeah, 4 days is pretty bad for something like that. And then she hasn't heard what's happened in the 4 days. So in her mind, she's actually probably thinking, well, they've only just read it today. He's called the tenant. And he just said, oh, can you not do that? So, I think Jenny's probably getting ticks across for in terms of if we would apply a reasonable test to everything.
Yeah.
Management company, look, they've actioned it. They've handled it, which is good. It hasn't, disappeared into the ether and nobody's playing, oh, I'm so sorry, we didn't get your email. Can you send it,
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the first I've heard of it. There's none of that nonsense.
Yeah.
But other than that, nah.
But
not
maybe
great.
just that extra bit of context in that email from the Strata manager, because
Well, I would say more than
obviously
that.
Jenny got that email right, and then she was left to kind of go, well, hang on, why is that all they're doing? There was probably the good reasons why that's all they did, but they didn't tell her that. Like, she's not a mind reader; she doesn't know. Like, I feel like if there'd been more context to that, it would have made her feel like, okay, so she's not left with a bunch of questions. So, well, why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? And why, because she has all the answers as to why. But also, it would make it feel like they understood it was important to her enough to explain why this is the outcome.
And here's where I think it goes downhill for everybody. And I don't like saying the Strata manager is fully to blame for this, but, probably kind of they are. Jenny cares about her building. Jenny's genuinely upset about how this has been handled, what happened and how it's been handled. I don't know when the next AGM is, but I'd be really surprised if she doesn't get up and talk about that. And if that's the first time other owners hear about it, that's not going to be a 2-minute conversation. That's going to be a 10-minute conversation. And if that's the first time the committee hear about it, it's probably the last time you see that manager at the AGM, would be my guess.
Yeah. Because now Jenny, going forward, like, Jenny now feels like Strata management doesn't care what happens in her. Strata management doesn't care what happens in her home. That's how she's now going to feel for the entirety of that management experience.
Doesn't care about her.
Like,
now, whether you have an inactive committee or sort of a slightly apathetic committee, because it could only be 40 apartments, and it could be majority tenants, and it might only be that you struggle to get 3 on the committee. And they do only what they have to do because somebody has to do it. Or whether you have a fully invested committee in the building. Jenny's got no idea if anyone else is even aware of this.
That's it, yeah.
And so it's not one of those things where the manager would have called the committee chair and it's all been put on hold for 3 days while the chairperson sort of tries to maybe heavy-handedly or beyond their authority run the ship. She hasn't made any comment around that or anything. It sounds to me like the manager has probably just been chipping away in the background and tried to deliver everything wrapped in a bow at the end and missed the opportunity at the start to give it some thought and understand, as we've both said, this is important to her.
Yeah.
So if we were to give the management a scorecard, again, it's a bit black and white. They're probably, okay, they did something. It's on record somehow. Right now, they're getting a C to C plus.
Yeah.
It's it's not a fail, but it is probably, from the sounds of things, the bare minimum that woulda, coulda, shoulda, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Because yeah, even in the email, like when I think about it now, like, there wasn't even the comment, like, we know this must have been frustrating, or even, if it happens again, please reach out to us straight away. Like, you know what I mean? There was nothing to reassure her at all about her experience or make her feel better about her
If it didn't say I
experience.
had called the tenant, I would have assumed it was an AI reply.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
how much
yeah,
it's like when you go on one of the chat bot for a website.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it was kind of the equivalent of your call is important to us. Please hold the
yeah.
line. You know.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's the part that I think sometimes is just it's missing. Like, as an owner, I just want to feel like you care. And I know it's probably going to sound wrong, but I don't actually even care if you do care or not. I just want to feel like you care. Fake it if you have to.
If you as a manager are acting in a way that's concordant with you do care, whether or not you actually
It,
personally care and think about
it
this at
doesn't matter.
5:30, doesn't matter. If you're acting in the way that is relatable to someone who does care, the
That's it.
outcome on the other end is, and
That's it.
the lived experience will be the same.
That's it.
And
Like,
I probably think, to your point, the manager can't take all of this on personally, and nobody's
no,
asking them to.
no. That's it.
Just what's the best way to handle it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think Jenny's probably
Hmm.
rightly pissed off.
So, look, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. So, and I think the elephant in the room is the fact that I have been on the other side.
Mm.
So I have been the resident. So yes, I'm all here for Team Jenny, and is Jenny, could Jenny have done anything different, etc., etc. The reality is, we all know the resident could have done something different, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
Like
I
we
think
said.
again, it's really easy to go, Jenny's the victim, the resident is the villain, right? But I think it's important again. I will, and I want to raise this because in these situations, this is where hostilities can really grow in a strata living environment, and you can end up with feuding neighbors and enemy style behavior starting to
Oh, of
happen.
course.
And
Yeah.
and I think it's really important for us to always stop and remember that this resident is not intentionally doing anything to upset Jenny. This
No.
is
No.
not personal. And until the person probably called, like until the strata manager called, or they didn't talk to the tenant, but until the tenant in some way was informed that they can't open, like prop the door open, etc., they may not have even considered that they were doing anything wrong.
Yep.
You know, he's just, and I think this is what people need to always try and do, put yourself in their shoes. So why would the tenant have done what they did? When we look at it from Jenny's perspective, well, it's obviously a bad idea. Like, as she said, what sort of idiot props
Well, I
open a
think
security
I think
door,
you I
right?
think you maybe nailed it earlier. The tenant has no idea what his guests are doing or her guests are doing. Probably the biggest thing they could do is let their friends into the building themselves.
That's it.
You can be the one in the hallway that opens the door, and if you want to prop your own apartment door open or leave it unlocked
But
so that your guests can get from the lift to your apartment, that's okay. That's going to be half an hour maybe. And leaving your apartment door unlocked is something you can readily do. You just say, okay, guys, I'm just going to, swipe you up to the third floor, turn right, and it's number 302 or whatever.
yeah.
But at least be the person that's checking who comes in the building on your behalf. That's probably in a building without a concierge, without an on-site manager. I think as a good neighbour, that's probably the right thing to do.
But okay, so I'm going to be that person again because I've been the resident,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I can draw on exactly where my mindset was. And yes, what you've described is exactly a solution to the problem, right? But if I'm honest, as the resident, that's not a solution to me because I want to be up in the party. I don't want to be standing
No,
at the
that's
door for
fair.
the
I
next
mean,
hour. I
and
want to be in the party
the
that
other
I'm
thing
hosting.
is, tell your guests you're going to swipe them in. Like when you invite them over, hey guys, just buzz me when you get here. Just remember to close the door behind you. I don't want any randoms following. Swinging back to the tenant, I still think and maybe look, this might be the ex law graduate and someone who has to apply the act from time to time or more than time to time. The owner is responsible for their occupier, and the occupier is responsible for their guests. In a sense, it's not outright, but let's broadly. And you've got to have some mindfulness about what your guests are doing. You wouldn't let them. You wouldn't let them play beer ping pong in the common hallway. That's an extreme example. You'd ask them to be mindful of noise on the way out if the party finished late. I think it's pretty easy just to add on to your invite text. I'll buzz you in, or let us. Someone will come and get you. Just please close the door behind you, for safety. Yeah. Look, it's
and I think that's just the thing. Like, I think my message to any owner, or let's just say resident, right, out there in Strata, living in a Strata building, is sometimes your convenience needs to be second to the safety of everyone in the building.
Yeah. Social
because at the end of the day, yes,
really.
the tenant chose their convenience over the safety of everyone else in the building, and that's not okay. And I think that's probably one of the things living in Strata, especially in apartment buildings and things like that, that I think you have to accept that sometimes your convenience cannot be more important than the overall safety of everybody else in the building.
And that's the deal.
I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk through this story with us today, Alex. I really do appreciate it.
Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it, and thanks for picking my brain on it.
Yeah, I will let you get back to your day, but we're going to stay on and just have a bit of a talk through on what we're taking away from this conversation, and just see if we can wrap that up a little bit. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Will do. Thanks, Jody. See you soon.
So I think one of the first things I need to acknowledge is that after that conversation with Alex, as an owner, I have to put my hand up and say I was wrong. I went into that conversation hoping to get some validation that some of my previous behaviours as an owner weren't really that bad. However, after the conversation, it's become really obvious to me that I was being selfish, and in some situations, I did actually impact the security of my building. But even outside of that realization, I have to say how surprised I was with how much learning came out of that discussion. So I went into the discussion assuming that because it was such a simple and small story, that we might struggle to get a reasonable amount of learnings out of the conversation. Okay, so let's start with the owner. And I think the first learning takeaway has to be safety before speaking. I think this was a really important learning that came out of the conversation. So as an owner, if you don't feel safe to speak up, it's okay not to speak up. So in Jenny's story, she made it really clear that when the resident mentioned that he'd propped the security door open with a rock, she was really annoyed. However, she chose not to say anything in that moment because she was in a lift with a group of people she didn't know who were clearly intoxicated. She didn't feel safe to directly raise it with the person right there on the spot. And I'm really grateful to Alex for really validating that Jenny was completely within her right not to raise it with the resident right there in the lift, and that Jenny choosing her safety over directly confronting the resident was completely acceptable, and no strata manager is going to expect or should expect that any owner try to address an issue with another resident or owner within the building in an environment where they don't feel safe to do so. So if you don't feel safe, it's okay to say, I didn't feel safe to raise it with them at the time. And I think that rolls really nicely into the next learning, which is fact-finding versus expectation. So Alex raised a really good point, and it was something that I've actually heard from owners before. In a situation like Jenny's, where she didn't obviously raise it directly with the resident at the time, when you do raise that complaint or that issue up to your strata manager, a lot of the time they will come back to you and they will ask you, so what have you done to resolve this yourself? What have you spoken to the resident? What did you say when it happened? And all those type questions that can sometimes as owners make us feel like, well, the onus is on us to have done something. And it's kind of like questioning, well, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that? And I think it was a really important point that Alex raised and explained, that when your strata manager does come back to you and ask those types of questions, they're actually fact-finding. It's not an expectation that you should have done any of the things that they're asking, did you do? What they're trying to do is make sure that they have a full picture of what has happened to date, both with the incident that you're raising, plus anything that might have happened afterwards, etc. So that when they do raise that up to the committee, they're giving the committee the full picture of where things currently sit, so that they can make a decision with all the information. But it is really fair to say that sometimes that does feel like there was an expectation that we should have done something. And I think it was really important that Alex made that really clear that that's not the case at all. The third learning, I think, has to be, don't assume owner malice. And what I mean by that is, don't assume that fellow owners know their actions are impacting you, or that they're even breaking the rules. Because it was really evident in Jenny's story that the resident wasn't being sneaky. He wasn't trying to hide the fact that he propped the door open. He claimed it straight in front of Jenny, as if it was a completely normal thing to do. So sometimes it's really easy as an owner to assume that when someone in the building does something that impacts us, that there was malice involved, that they know they were, doing something that affected you. But let's be honest, as human beings, a lot of the time, we're so unaware of the impact of our actions on other people. So it's really important as a starting point, when an issue arises, to assume that the owner had no idea that they were impacting you, that they had no idea they were breaking a rule. Because most of the time they don't. And I'm not saying all the time, but I'm saying a lot of the time with situations like this one in Jenny's story, the resident obviously had no comprehension of the impact of his behaviour and that he was breaking a rule at all. And I think that one rolls really nicely into the next learning, which is put yourself in their shoes. Sometimes it can be really infuriating as an owner when another owner does something that impacts us. But I think a really important thing that came out of this conversation is, if you can stop for a moment and just think in the shoes of the other person and kind of think, well, hang on, why did they do what they did? Are they aware of the impact that it's having? Sometimes that can really help to kind of go, actually, they obviously just don't realize they're breaking the rule, and they were just trying to do what was convenient for them. They had a party and they were just like, well, if I prop the door open, I don't have to keep going down and letting people in. And they weren't meaning to impact other people. They did. And it still needs to be addressed. But sometimes if we can put ourselves in that person's shoes, it can help us feel less angry, I guess. And I think the second part of that is, remember this incident when the shoe is on the other foot. So one of the big learnings that came away from this conversation for me is, when I propped open the security door so that people could come in for a housewarming party that I had, I never considered the impact I was having on the other people in the building. But when somebody else propped open the security door, I was very, very quick to be angry and judgmental and all those things because, hang on, someone was impacting my security in the building. In that moment, if I just stopped to remember what it was like to be in the other person's shoes, perhaps I could have been a bit more forgiving and vice versa if those moments where I had propped the security door open so people could come in for events in my unit, if I'd stopped to remember what it was like to realise that someone had left the door open for their guests and how that made me feel, maybe I wouldn't have chosen to prop the door open. So, it is one of those things. It helps to put yourself in their shoes, and it helps to remember what it was like in those shoes when you're making decisions around the building on your behaviour and your actions. And I think the next one has to be, this was a big one for me, no bylaw equals no breach. So it never actually occurred to me that if there is no rule or bylaw in place, there can't be a bylaw breach. You can't say that someone broke the rule if there's no rule. And I think one of the really important things that came out of the conversation is common sense doesn't equal a rule. So just because it's common sense, well, it's a security door, don't prop it open, like, oh, duh. If it's not a rule, they didn't break it. And that's a really hard one sometimes to accept as an owner, because there are things that we kind of go, well, you don't need a defined bylaw about this. Like, it's just common sense. And it is, and it still needs to be addressed when somebody does something that does impact the building security or whatever. But you can't expect a bylaw breach. You can't expect it to be treated like they broke a building rule if there's no rule saying you can't do it. And I think the last learning takeaway that I will raise from this discussion was know who made the decision. So in Jenny's story, she got so angry when the Strata manager came back and advised her what the outcome was, and that what they had done was message the owner and ask them to please pass along to the resident that they can't prop open security doors and they shouldn't do it again in the future. So she makes it really clear that she didn't really know what she expected the punishment to be, but she definitely did expect there to be a punishment. And when it turns out that that's not the outcome of the situation, she was really angry at the Strata manager, and her statement was, what's the point of having a Strata manager if they don't do anything in these moments, right? And it was really helpful to have Alex explain what probably happened on the other side of that decision, and that decision doesn't actually sit with the Strata manager. So although the Strata manager is the one who sends us the email as an owner, we receive the email from the Strata manager saying this is the outcome, this is the decision that was made, etc. In most situations, the Strata manager isn't the one who made that decision. The Strata manager would have sent that off to the committee, and the committee would have come back and said, this is how we want to proceed. Now, the Strata manager might have included in their email a recommendation on how they should proceed. But at the end of the day, that decision sits with the committee. And we have to, as owners, again, remember that we voted that committee in as an owners corporation. So at the AGM, we vote, and as a collective, we decide who we want to give the authority to as our committee members to act on our behalf in these situations. And the truth is, if you don't like the decisions that the committee are making, that's not on the Strata manager. That either means that you've got the wrong people on your committee, but again, the owners corporation voted them on. And it might mean that, maybe it's time for a change in committee. But also, less dramatically, maybe if a lot of owners aren't happy with the decisions that the committee are making, maybe have a human conversation. Maybe reach out and say, hey, we're just wondering if we can have a conversation because we're not aligned on a lot of the decisions you're making. Can we have a conversation about a different approach on when these situations occur and things like that? It's really easy to forget that an owner's corporation is just a group of people deciding how to live together and care for the building that they're jointly invested in. So it's really important to understand who made the decision. And because once you understand who made the decision, you can more effectively affect a different decision in the future. Okay, so let's look at the learning outcomes for the resident. So I think there's two really clear learning outcomes, and I think they're really obvious, but I still want to take a moment to break them down. So I think the first one has to be consider the impact to others. So think about the impact of your behaviour on others in the building. Community living means it's not just about you. It's not even just about, well, what I do in my unit only impacts me. No, it doesn't. You are living in an environment where you have shared walls, where there is vast amount of common property, and the decisions that you make and the behaviours that you undertake in the building, anywhere on that property, impacts others, and that's their home too. So it's really important as an owner to stop and consider the impact to others before you do something. Go, how will this impact others? And the truth is, most of the time, most of the things you do in a building will impact others to a degree. And if you stop and think about it, you can then kind of go, okay, well, is that something that I need to mitigate? Do I need to let other owners near me in the building know that I'm going to have a party and there might be a bit of excess noise, but I'll definitely make sure it's all turned off by 11 p.m, etc. It makes you a better neighbour. And then I think obviously the second one has to be respect security points. So respect the security points in the building. Security is important. Simply close the doors. If the door has a security swipe access on it, there's probably a reason why that's a security point in the building. So when the resident chose to prop open the security door, what he actually did was let strangers into everybody's backyard. And I know everyone would be like, some people would be like, well, yeah, but he knew all the people coming. Yes, but when he was upstairs having a great time at his party, anyone could have walked into that building. And I know he wasn't thinking about that, but it doesn't change the reality. The security doors in a strata building are there for a reason. So if it's a security door, close it behind you and don't prop it open as much as, and I'm speaking from my own experience here, as much as the convenience will call for you to prop it open. It's a security door for a reason. It needs to be closed. So let's move on to the strata manager. I think the first one needs to be confirm fact finding versus expectation. So obviously one of the learning outcomes for owners was the fact that when strata managers are asking you, what have you done to date to resolve this problem yourself? And have you spoke to them? Have you done this? Have you done that? There's no expectation that you've done those things. They're just fact-finding to make sure that when they raise the issue up to the committee, they have all the relevant information so they can paint a picture of what's happened to date. But from a strata manager's learning perspective, I want to raise that it's really important that you confirm that, right? So it's really important that you start that conversation with, there's no expectation that you've done any of these things, but I just want to confirm so that I've got all the facts. Did you raise this with the person when it happened? Have you spoken to them about it since? Have any other owners indicated to you that they were impacted in the same way? All of those questions sit differently with an owner if the confirmation that it's not an expectation that they've done any of these things comes first. So I think that's a really important takeaway for strata managers, because in many of our episodes before, one of the things we've really highlighted is that nobody is a great communicator when they feel like they're being blamed for something. So if an owner feels like you're kind of highlighting, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? They're going to get defensive, and they're probably not going to be as easy to deal with. So it's really important in these moments when you are fact finding and you are coming back to an owner after a complaint and asking for more details as what they've done, etc. Start the conversation with, there's not an expectation that you've done any of these things. I'm just wanting to make sure I've got the full picture of what's happened to date. And I think the second learning for strata managers is acknowledge the complaint. So in Jenny's story, I think one of the things that angered her is that it took 4 days to get any reply to her complaint at all. Now, Alex was great at explaining that there was probably a whole pile of activity happening in the background, but Jenny didn't know that. All Jenny knows is that she sent off a complaint about something that was really important to her, and for 4 days no one cared. And that's a really important thing to raise to strata managers. Nobody takes the time to stop and write an email to complain about something unless it matters to them. And every moment that we don't get a reply to that email is a moment where we assume that no one cares. And Alex explained very clearly that probably wasn't the case at all, and the strata manager was probably running around the background doing a bunch of stuff. But Jenny's experience was that the strata manager didn't care. For 4 days, they didn't care. So it's just really important, and it's such a small thing that has such a huge impact. Just a simple reply back and acknowledge the complaint. Because I think that really ties into, and I think this has been a learning outcome in every single story we've done to date, be in it together. The ongoing us against them that's happening between owners and strata managers in the industry at the moment is really problematic. And a root cause of it is because owners feel like the strata manager is against them, not with them. They feel like they're alone in dealing with a lot of things. As an owner, sometimes I just want to feel like you care. I just want to feel like we're in this together. And when I raise something that's happened that matters to me, I want to feel like you understand that it matters to me. I want to know that, you're like, I understand why you're upset about this. We're going to figure out what we can do about this. Let's look into it together. I want language that makes me feel like we're addressing the problem together, not I'm on the outside of it and I'm dealing with it on my own, and I'm almost having to, it automatically feels like I'm fighting to get the strata manager to care. So using language that makes me feel like we're in it together will automatically turn a conversation that could have turned into a us against them into a us against the problem. And it's such a small shift in language that will completely change the outcome of a lot of owner complaint conversations. And I think the next one kind of rolls into that a little bit. And that's set communication expectations. So it's one thing to acknowledge the complaint, but as Jenny said, in her view, it took 4 days to even acknowledge the complaint. But there was a whole pile of stuff going on in the background, right? Now, it took 4 days to go through that process. So if the strata manager had acknowledged the complaint within 24 hours of receiving it, and then the reply actually, one, acknowledged the complaint, made her feel like they were in it together, and set expectations for what comes next, then the fact that it took 4 days to resolve the problem wouldn't have actually impacted Jenny almost at all, because if that email had come back within 24 hours saying, I'm going to go look into it and let the committee know what's happened, I'll come back to you within the week and let you know next steps. Jenny's then not expecting an email back for a week. So when she got an email back 4 days later, she is happy to receive the email instead of annoyed when she receives the email. So it is, and it seems like such a small thing, but it's not happening across the board. So there isn't that expectation setting of, hey, we've got your email, this is what we're going to do, we'll come back to you within this time frame. Owners are feeling like no one cares, and everyone's saying that it's response. It's not response, it's communication, it's expectation setting. Ensuring everyone's expectations are aligned on what comes next means that no one's sitting on the other end of their inbox going, oh, they haven't even got back to me yet, because they know you're not going to get back to them for a week. So sometimes it's those really small shifts in behaviour that can just really quickly improve an experience for an owner. And I think that rolls nicely into the next one, which is put their mind at ease. So it's one thing to come back and say, so this is the outcome, etc., etc., etc. But with some situations, some complaints, there's always going to be that concern of, well, what if it happens again? Right? And even if the outcome of that complaint wasn't necessarily to Jenny's liking, if that email back to her had included a simple sentence of, if there is a repeat of this, if you find that other people are propping open the door at any point, please let me know straight away and we will address it. What that does for Jenny is to kind of go, okay, well, they acknowledge that it is a problem and they're now on board. They're now ready to help me the minute that it happens again. It's that whole we're in it together, and we're not just in it together until the complaint is closed. We're in it together for the long term. These little shifts change the relationship between owner and strata manager. And I know the industry keeps looking at all these big things that can be done to resolve the issues between strata manager and owner, but sometimes it truly is these little tweaks in behaviour that can actually have a really huge impact. So I think the next one has to be explain the outcome. So telling them what's been done is not enough. You need to explain what was done to get to this outcome, who was involved in the decision, and why was this decision or pathway chosen? Because that explanation can be the difference between an escalation or a thank you. It's one of those things where if you feel like a process was followed and you have context of why the outcome has been the outcome, sometimes it's easier to accept. If you're just told that the tenant has been, notified that it's not okay and they're not to do it again, it feels like a nothing. It feels like no one put any effort or care into it. But if I get an email as an owner, if I get an email saying, okay, so this is what we've done, it went to the committee and the committee has made the decision to do this, and we've then gone to the owner and the owner's now confirmed that the resident has been told they can't do that again, and the residents apologised and they said they definitely won't prop the door open again. They didn't realise, that it was, that it was impacting owners, and they have apologised. And we've decided not to issue a bylaw breach because this is the first time this resident has, done anything against the building rules, etc., etc., etc. I, as an owner, when I get that email, I feel like effort was put in. I feel like they cared enough to go through this process, and it's been thought about and it's been discussed, and I don't feel like there was just an outcome. I feel like they cared and there was a resolution. And I know many people go, yeah, but it's the same thing. But it's not about whether it's the same thing, it's about how does it feel for the owner. And I think the reality is how that outcome is explained sometimes can be the difference between an escalation and a thank you. And I think that also rolls into the next learning outcome, which is offer next steps. So we all know that Jenny wasn't happy with the outcome of her complaint. And she made that really clear, because her comment afterwards was she didn't quite know what she expected to happen, but there should, it just seemed to her like there should be some sort of punishment. And she even went on to make the comment of what's the point of having a strata manager if they don't do anything in these moments, right? So she wasn't happy with the outcome. And it left her feeling like she was on the outside. There was no in it together feeling for her. Like she almost felt like they'd gone, well, we've done our job, closed, the complaints dealt with. And of course, she didn't feel like the complaints dealt with. Now, she was very clear she didn't know what she expected. Now, if that email had included at the end something along the lines of, if you'd like to discuss the outcome of the complaint, please feel free to let me know and we'll make a time to jump on a call and talk it through. Or even something as simple as, if you'd like to talk more about the, any other issues you have with the security in the building, please, send me an email. I'd be happy to forward along to the committee for discussion, etc. I think the point is, don't wait for them to come back and say, I'm not happy. Give context of their options, because it really does tie it back into the learning of being in it together. A lot of the time, owners just want to feel like someone cares, someone hears them. And the truth is, if you can provide a simple next step of, look, if you want to, if you want to talk through it more, give me a call. We'll, make a time. We'll jump on a call. We'll talk. Most of the time, they don't want that. They're just going to be like, yeah, well, it's nice that he offers, but okay. And they probably won't, but they'll feel like that strata manager cared. And that matters. And it matters to owners more than strata managers sometimes notice. All right, so now that we've finished going through the list of learning outcomes from this discussion, I just want to do a little reminder that just one change in behaviour, just one of the things on that list, could have completely changed the experience of this story. So for all the Jennies out there, all the strata managers out there, and even residents having a party, you have the power to change this experience. So give it a try. Jump over to our socials and let us know how you go. And remember that this is not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning. So we learn, we try, and we continue the conversation. And if the conversation leads to new learnings, we will drop a link to an episode update below. Now, myself personally, I think what I've taken away from this episode is I need to now go and check whether my building has a bylaw about the security doors in the building, because I'm very aware that there's a lot of conversation a lot of the time from owners about the annoyance of people propping open the security doors in my building. Now, it's usually not for parties and it's usually not at night, etc. It's usually people moving in and out of the building. But there have been a couple of occurrences that I'm aware of where someone's been moving out of the building and they've then loaded up the truck and they've left the door propped open. And that has gone into the evening, not overnight the way it did for Jenny. But we do have commercial on the ground floor of the building. So we do have the public wandering through past the door to our lobby. So there is definitely a security risk if that door is left propped open and unattended. But just like the learning in this discussion, I don't actually know if my building has a bylaw that says that you can't prop open the security doors. So there has been a lot of discussion before about, there needs to be a breach sent to, whatever unit moved out that day, etc. But I think we might actually fall into the category of we assume it's a rule because it's common sense, but maybe we don't actually have a bylaw, because I don't think a bylaw breach has ever been sent. So as always, please hit the subscribe button so that you're notified when new stories and new episodes are released. And I just want to take the moment to say thank you to everyone for coming on this journey with me. We're receiving so many messages from owners saying that it's really nice to see what this learning journey looks like for an owner, seeing that it's not a perfect process, that it's okay to think you know something and find out that you don't know something, and to see the time that it can sometimes take to look into something and figure out what you do about it. So I'm just really grateful that you're all coming along on this journey with me. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.